Sneako is the Jar Jar Binks of the Dawa-verse. They thought that inserting him into the story would breathe some new life into the franchise, but he just ended up annoying us.
He's embarrassing.
So, why is Sneako the poster boy for Dawa? It's pretty simple, really. For 13 centuries, Islam spread by force. In the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire fought in World War I and lost. After that, the Caliphate fell apart. It was clear that Islam could no longer compete with far more powerful Western nations, so Muslims started focusing on Dawah to spread Islam. But they realized that most people knew next to nothing about Islam, so they lied about Islam a lot. They made up all kinds of nonsense about the perfect preservation of the Quran and scientific miracles, and this worked well because there was an atmosphere of ignorance about Islam. People didn't know anything about the Quran, so the Dawagandists could say absolutely anything. They kept going until the internet and the availability of Muslim sources made it easier to refute the lies that were being told. The arguments don't work on anyone who's familiar with the topic, or as we like to put it, the arguments don't work on anyone who's familiar with the Dawa script. This means that Dawagandists who want to continue using the arguments need to find people who are still in a state of total ignorance. And that's why the focus in recent years has shifted to getting popular influencers like Andrew Tate and Sneako and now Lily J to spread Islam. Muslim leaders know that people like Andrew Tate and Sneako and Lily J have some of the most ignorant and gullible followers on the planet. And Muslim leaders know they can get access to these ignorant and gullible followers through the influencers. The goal is to win the race that's going on. They need to dupe enough people into converting to keep Islam from falling apart, just long enough for Islam to take over some modern countries and impose blasphemy laws that will silence critics. Once the critics have been silenced, no one can object to the lies and Islam wins. So that's why they're using Sneako. They want access to his followers, and they want to steer his followers towards the sheikhs who are plotting to subjugate the world. A perfect example here is Sheikh Asim al-Hakim, who advises Muslims to prepare for a time when they'll be able to go door to door, forcing people to either convert to Islam, pay protection money, or be executed.
Jihad, linguistically, is to struggle, and technically, it is to fight for the cause of Allah. And what is the reason behind such jihad? Number one, to call them to Islam. It is for da'wah. The jihad is only for da'wah. That is why when Muslims go and conquer the adjacent country, what do? We kill them all? No. The Prophet says, the first thing you do is call them to Islam. If they accept it, leave them. Khalas, they're Muslims. We go. If they refuse, then tell them Allah obliged upon you to pay taxation, jizya. If they refuse, then we have to fight. And if we fight you, then we capture you, you become our slaves, and we take your land, and you take because you refuse, I give you two good options.
Sneako met with Sheikh Asim, and he quickly learned that he's not allowed to question anything Muhammad said. Here's Sneako's big question for the Sheikh.
I've been struggling with this one ever since I read this hadith, which, I have to admit I didn't like when I read it. And the hadith is the Prophet, peace be upon him, he said that the people of Yemen are the best of people.
There are hadiths about what Muhammad did to a little girl named Aisha, hadiths about beating women into submission, even beating women until their skin turns green, hadiths about fighting and subjugating unbelievers simply for being unbelievers, and so on, and so on, and so on. But the hadith that really bothered Sneako, due to his perfectly functioning moral compass, was a hadith about the people of Yemen being the best of people.
First of all, we as Muslims have to have submission, certainty, no questions asked, no strings attached. This is Quran, I believe it. Do you fully embrace it? Yes. No questions asked.
If Muhammad said it, no questions asked, no strings attached, you submit. And Sheikh Asim is correct, according to the Quran. Surah 4, verse 65. But know, by your Lord, they can have no faith until they make you, O Muhammad, blah, 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 judge in all disputes between them, and find in themselves no resistance against your decisions, and accept them with full submission. Islam means submission, but submission to Allah requires full submission to all of Muhammad's decisions. If you have any resistance against any of Muhammad's decisions, you have no real faith and you're not a Muslim. You have to unquestioningly obey everything Muhammad says. And who received this revelation? Muhammad.
This is a hadith. Do you take it? Is it authentic? Is it?
That's what I read, yeah.
Then if it's authentic, it's from Allah. How could I be shaky? Because if you want to be shaky, this means that you don't have certainty. And when you don't have certainty, you're this close to flipping to the dark side.
You don't question it. Because if you question it, you don't have certainty. And you're in danger of leaving Islam.
But, I mean, how are we able to judge how authentic hadith is, or...
You don't. How do you judge whether this neurosurgeon who's going to do a spine cord surgery on you is authentic or not?
Judged by opinions of other people.
Okay, so by whose people?
The professionals.
Professionals. So you go to the scholars.
That's why I'm asking you.
Go to the scholars. Which scholars? Muslim scholars. Don't go to non-Muslim scholars to find out if a hadith is accurate, because non-Muslim scholars are going to give you a very different answer. And I'm not talking about Islamophobic non-Muslim scholars. I'm talking about non-Muslim scholars who defend Islam. What do they think about the reliability of hadiths? Let me quote a passage from Dr. Joshua Little, who's made it one of his life's goals to defend Islam against critics. He's a non-Muslim scholar of hadiths. Here's what he thinks about them. That hadith are unreliable. That any given matan, that's the content of the story, cannot be taken at face value as an accurate datum from the first Islamic century, and that any given isnad, that's the list of people who transmitted the story, cannot be taken at face value as an accurate record of a matan's provenance, cannot be seriously contested for multiple reasons. Firstly, there is an overwhelming prior probability based upon the ubiquity of fabrication and pseudepigraphy in late antique and medieval religio-historical, pagan, Jewish, and Christian ascriptions. He's saying that lots of people were fabricating stories during this time. Secondly, there is the high frequency of contradictions within the hadith corpus, which necessitates the occurrence of a huge amount of fabrication, interpolation, and or mutation, and therefore skepticism towards any given hadith. Thirdly, there is the ubiquity of fabrication and interpolation, both reported and demonstrable, in the hadith corpus, which again casts doubt upon the rest of the corpus. Fourthly, there is the rapid, extreme mutation and growth of reports that evidently took place over the course of a century or more of oral transmission, which means that any given matan, regardless of the isnad, is likely at best heavily distorted and at worst obliterated beyond its original form. Fifthly, there is the belated emergence of hadith as a genre and corpus, largely during the 8th and 9th centuries CE, which straightforwardly precludes the authenticity of most ascriptions to the 7th century CE. In other words, non-Muslim hadith scholars think the entire system is a joke. That's why Sneako should only go to a Muslim scholar who will lie and tell him that they have certainty about these stories.
The biggest problem we have with the Westerners from America and from Canada and from Europe is that they don't have their Islam on cemented area. They're so easy to flip to the other side. And that's why you find many of them starting to be good and strong and mashallah, and all of a sudden, I have doubts.
So, people convert to Islam in the West and they start off strong, but then they have doubts. Why? I'll tell you why. Dawagandists lie to them to get them to convert. And then after they convert, they learn more about Islam, and it's not what they were told. You told me Muhammad was the greatest man who ever lived. Now that I'm reading about him, he doesn't sound like the greatest man who ever lived. Why didn't you tell me about this before I converted? How does Sheikh Asim al-Hakim respond when a Muslim has doubts?
I have doubts. Why? The Prophet married Aisha when she was 9. You're a kafir. If you doubt the Prophet ﷺ for a second, you're a full-fledged kafir. Get the heck out of my house.
If you doubt, you're a kafir. But you're a kafir after you converted to Islam, which makes you an apostate. That's a dangerous thing to be in a Muslim country, which is why it's far less common to express doubts in a Muslim country. So, the local dawah-gandist tells you that Islam must be true because Muhammad's character was so amazing, and because the Quran has been perfectly preserved, and because the Quran is filled with miraculous scientific insights. And you convert before bothering to do the slightest bit of research. Then eventually you do some reading, you watch some videos, you hear some responses, and you realize that everything the dawah-gandist told you was complete nonsense. You express your doubts to your local sheikh, and he says, "Get out of my house, you're a kafir." If you're in a Muslim country, you're in trouble. If you're in a Western nation, you'll probably be okay, for now. The long-term goal of Sheikh Asim al-Hakim and the dawah-gandists is to make it unsafe everywhere to be a kafir or an apostate, so that no one will ever be able to question Islam or express doubts about it. Do you want to live in a world where you have to mindlessly agree with the ramblings of an illiterate 7th century Arabian caravan robber? If you don't, I suggest you recognize that you're in this race too, whether you want to be or not. And this is a race you'd better win.